Alright, episode 19 of World Solution Writing Process. Gonna try to keep this one as a pure writing process episode with only the random fragments, not careening off into any specific topic, like I did on the last episode with random fragments. Hopefully this will be a micro episode. I've got 4 pages of notes to burn through, to read into the microphone. Here we go. So I've got a section on combat, which goes against the general recommendation of nonviolence, but it's a section that's there in case you're in some exceptional situation, and it's necessary. Combat fragment. The insurrectionary anarchist Alfredo Bonanno summarized the revolutionary process as, quote, "from irrational riot to conscious insurrection," end quote. National Refoundation fragment. We can be internationalists in the sense of starting a revolution in our country which spreads to other countries and thereby uplifts the world. We can do this without opening the border to literally the whole world, something which would dismantle the national sovereignty on which democratic sovereignty is based. End fragment. Fragment from the section Capitalism is Bad. Most social and individual problems are either caused by private ownership of the means of production, artificial scarcity, or wealth inequality. End fragment. Fragment from the section Crowd Revolution Strategy. We need something similar to the Arab Spring or color revolutions in form, but with socialist instead of liberal politics, or both simultaneously in the form of democratic socialist crowd revolutions. End fragment. Next fragment on National Refoundation. Contrary to the assumptions of revolutionary defeatism, the stronger the global pressure by anti-democratic forces against the USA, the stronger will be the domestic reactionary backlash. We must deflate reactionary backlash by ensuring the rebellion in the USA is domestic and has no connections with foreign reactionaries who happen to be anti-American and pose as forces of national liberation. The socialist revolution in America must be American, or it will fail. Next fragment from the section Why Regime Change. It seems that in the life of revolutionary organizations, they must at some point pivot from reform struggles to concretely preparing a change of government through other methods. Very short fragment. On parallel government, I made a note to myself to include mention of the Iraq Coalition Provisional Authority, which was a foreign-imposed provisional government, but still technically was one. Adding to the section Managing the New Regime, a fragment, an excessive purge of the bureaucracy in Iraq created a disenfranchised and unemployed population, which became an insurgency. Of course, you might think insurgency is always a good thing, but if you're talking about the capitalist insurgency against a new socialist government, that's something you have to manage. Class and identity fragment. It consistently becomes impossible to have the necessary highly focused conversations about transforming the economy or achieving a change of government if those who don't prioritize class over identity are included in the conversation. End fragment. I make a note to myself to look something up. Apparently, Section 56 of the British Constitution, there's some conflict where a Governor General has to approve of the budget somehow, and that this could actually cause a sort of constitutional crisis. Next fragment, Crowd Revolution Strategy. It may seem pointless to begin anti-government protests until everyone is already on board, but everyone won't get on board unless someone goes first by initiating small-scale anti-government protests. Make a note to myself, there's a lot going on with Khan Abdul and Ghaffar Khan in Pakistan, between different factions, different parties in Pakistan, which are declaring each other illegitimate right now. A lot of political instability in Pakistan, a lot of economic crisis. In another fragment, I make a note to myself that the Texas provisional government was a provisional government. In the Crowd Revolution Strategy section, a fragment, to look up all results on Wikipedia when you type in the phrase anti-government protest into the search bar. And boy, does it give you a lot. It gives you a lot of different protests at different moments. A lot of them since 2010, or at least since year 2000. Parallel government fragment. A provisional government may be like a first draft. Class and identity fragment. How bizarre it is that when we speak of the oppressed, we have forgotten that the working class and the people in general under capitalism are the largest, main, and most strategically central oppressed group. Another class and identity fragment. We must stop conflating race and nation in the style of Maoists, specifically on the black question. If a racial, quote, nation is not geographically concentrated enough to constitute a potential nation-state, then it is a race or ethnicity and not a nation. I have some comedy interspersed here. I'll get to that later. National refoundation. If the USA had a socialist revolution, the world would first wonder if the Americans had gone crazy, but then would quickly realize that the Americans had finally come to their senses. Nonviolence and laftivism. To balance gravity and levity, it may help for a parallel government to have a specific committee or subcommittee which has a strict rule of only speaking in nonsense. Do you ever get tired of the pee-pee poo-poo? Nanny noo-noo. Hey you, do the doo-doo, nanny noo-noo, nanny noo-noo. Loo-loo-loo-loo. Woo. Moo. Next fragment. On revolutionary dictatorship. If the socialist revolution is more globally widespread, this would not only increase the likeliness that transitional revolutionary dictatorships would correctly revert later to socialist democracy, but would also increase the likeliness of avoiding the use of revolutionary dictatorships entirely. Next fragment. For my comedy routine, I'm holding off these reactionaries with a steady cloud of weed. The second civil war is being fought puff by puff. Next fragment. Geopolitics. When interpreting the world, everyone has to use the materialist method for themselves. My usage of it has taken me away from the traditional geopolitical assumptions of Leninism. Next fragment. Nonviolence. Forming a parallel government is the most extreme form of nonviolent action. Next, geopolitics. The nation of Greece is the conduit by which Middle Eastern democracy struggles were transformed into the anti-austerity class struggles of the European continent. Next, change of government. 33 Thomas Street, New York City, is the location of a major center of telecommunications, and the revolution would greatly benefit by its being taken over by its own workforce. Next section. Time is running out, accelerate now. Fragment. COP28, which was I think a Copenhagen meeting for climate, in late 2023, called for net zero carbon emissions by 2050, but it really needs to be by 2030. Next section. Parallel government. Fragment. It may be possible to get cities to declare independence from the capitalist government on the basis of city-level socialist parallel governments. The goal would not be permanent city independence, but initiating and supporting a nationwide socialist government. And to be clear, when you're at a city level, you gotta contend against your own city council. The capitalist city council has to have a opposing parallel government at the city level. In some places, these were called revolutionary committees because they were actually kind of small. They were just transitional executive administrations in areas taken over by the Red Army during the Russian Civil War. But not to harp on that for too long. Laftivism. Role-playing games are participatory art and therefore a situationist practice. Next fragment. Why regime change section. The growth of wealth inequality, an intrinsic and unavoidable tendency within capitalism, which generally only worsens over time, has increasingly made the system more stiffly resistant to reform, especially against economic redistribution. Next fragment. Crowd revolution strategy section. The mistake of dominant socialist strategy is to prioritize building the party or organization actively while treating the construction of a revolutionary government as something which can only arise through pure spontaneity. In fact, placing the construction of a revolutionary government as the central goal of a socialist organization or revolutionary party is the precise way to most effectively build the organization or party, by giving it a clear point and goal, rather than revolving around endless reforms and base building with no clear blueprint of how such activity leads to the final goal. Next fragment, multi-party socialism section, chapter. Contrary to the assumption that anarchism is biologically spontaneous, forming socialist governments is an extension of human biology and nature. and a spontaneous, nearly unconscious human response to living in the conditions of capitalism. Next fragment, geopolitics chapter. It's possible to support the actions of your country's government in one place while opposing them in another place. Next fragment, capitalism is bad chapter. We helplessly inflict on others the stresses to which we have been subjected. We cannot break cycles because we can't break the laws of thermodynamics. We can try to invert cycles, and be aware that minor changes during each iteration of the cycle eventually build up and create breakthroughs. In psychology, they refer to it as displacement, when you take your stress out on someone else who had nothing to do with it. And my argument is that most interpersonal negativity under capitalism is a displacement cascade, where one person displaces onto another, and then they displace onto another, and it goes down the chain. To quote various HBO shows, the shit flows downhill. Next fragment. The section, Main Veins of Marxism, which will also cover punk rock. Main veins of Marxism and punk rock. Punk rock as a product of Marxism. If you didn't know that, MC5 were proto-punk, and they were actually Maoists who came out of the White Panther Party. And also, the Situationists, who have massively influenced punk rock, came out of a group, a socialist group, Third Camp socialist group, which is a split off from Trotskyism, called Socialism or Barbarism in France. So, punk rock was Marxist before it was anarchist, is deeply influenced by Marxism. That's why I say things like anarchy isn't punk enough. But anyway, next. Yeah. Oh, that section, the fragment only said music has become boring. And my point is that, do we really need another song? Or do we need a better revolutionary strategy to make it even worth having songs at all? The world is pretty brutal right now, and we need real plans. And songs can support the plans, but what we really need is the plans that go beyond just songs. That's my grumpy boomer get off my lawn point, but I think it's right. Anyway, next fragment on the capitalism is bad section. The common thread of most personal and interpersonal negativity is the stress of living under artificial scarcity. Next fragment, same chapter, capitalism is bad. Stress cannot be infinitely repressed, only displaced onto those who gave it to you or displaced onto some undeserving third party. Next fragment, last fragment, geopolitics chapter. The time has come for Europe to burst with protest against capitalist governments, but even Europe may need America to go first. Hope you enjoyed episode 19 of World Solution Writing Process. Have a good day. Signing off.